0. Welcome to the first webinar with Martien Hermes for the Aphesis, which means in English Zodiacal releasing, and he will use for demonstration purposes my data. But before that, I give you some background about what we are doing today. And that is this special site called Traditionelle Astrologie, Genetlialogie, Horary, Kathartic, Mundane, and there is a special sub-site called Martien Hermes Webinars. And here you find a link to Robert Schmidt's release of his workshop. I recommend to listen to all the MP3s here. And then you have a link to the Martien Hermes film list. The first videos are with Martien, and later on there are other videos concerning also the zodiacal releasing. And then here's the book in German published at Astronova, publisher in Tübingen by Reinhard Stiele. And this is the theoretical background book for what Martien Hermes is going to demonstrate today. And this is the special event when Martien was talking with me on the 3rd of March, 2021. And we don't need that. And now I give the host for, I get out of this thing. Okay, now let's see. I think I have to close. Okay, let's see whether I can give the host to Martien this way, that he takes over from here. Host change. Yes. Martien, you are now the host.
Thank you very much, Volker. Now I will put up the presentation, the slides and all that. So I'm hoping this will be an interesting demonstration for you. First of all, I'd like to thank Volker for giving me the opportunity to do this here, because this is a very important technique coming over from Hellenistic astrology, which was discovered in the research in the old texts of Greek astrology, written in Greek. And this one was first discovered in the works of Vettius Valens. And it's a very interesting method. So thank you, Volker, for giving me the opportunity to present this here.
Oh, you're quite welcome. And I want to inform the viewers, we do this because there is not much information about demonstrating the astrological, traditional astrology craft with real people who are not famous. To do a demonstration with Napoleon or Stalin or John F. Kennedy, that's easy. But to do a demonstration of the everyday's work of the traditional astrology, that's the focus of this webinar. And he will use my data, and I supplied some biography, I don't get the English thing, but I gave him some information about my life, let's put it this way. And he will use that information and demonstrates this special technique of Aphesis or Aphesis, however you like it, and in English that's zodiacal releasing. You find a lot of information about that on the Chris Brennan video in the film list, but go ahead, Martien, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Volker. So let me first give you a sort of an overview of this part one, what I will try to demonstrate in this presentation. First, I will show you how to calculate the scenario, which is possible with this method of zodiacal releasing. Second, I will explain what it's all about, because it's, of course, very important to know what we are seeing when we do this. Then I will show you some preliminary evaluation of the scenario, which is the result of this method. Then I will tell you something about the changes in the major periods, because each person of us, as you will be shown, has about between 4 or perhaps 6 of these periods in life, which have to do with zodiacal releasing, or aphesis, as I called it for the European audience. That's a very interesting way of approaching this scenario. And then I will go over into the question what happens in each major period, because each major period is divided into sub-periods. I will show you the mechanics of this method. I opened with a quote by Robert Schmidt, who did a tutorial on zodiacal releasing, and he named it Charting Career with Hellenistic Astrology. So his focus was mainly on trying to get a grip on how somebody's career developed. And his work is, of course, the source for this presentation. So, and he said in that tutorial, the things that will arouse the soul to action are the planets with the lot of spirit are providing testimony to it. And that is a very important key to understanding what happens when you do this scenario and what you are able to see with it. So let's have a look. So the method is based on the years of the minor periods of the planets in relation to the lot of the daimon, the spirit. I call it myself the lot of the daimon. Is of course a very good translation of the word daimon, but the word daimon has some more punch to it than the word spirit alone, because the word spirit is a bit overused in a sense, so you lose some sort of feeling with it. And when I started using the word daimon, that somehow did something to the understanding of what this method is about, and I hope it will do so for you as well. Now, the method is called zodiacal releasing, which is the name that Robert Schmidt gave to it, because there was no specific name for this method to differentiate it from other methods that were presented in the works of Veges Valens. So I called it aphesis, and aphesis is actually the Greek word for a starting point for any sort of a releasing. That could be another method as well, but I call it aphesis because the word zodiacal releasing from spirit is quite a long name in Dutch as well. So I used the word aphesis. The releasing itself is called perfection, and my English audience will know that the word perfection is also used for a yearly method of trying to make a scenario for a year, and that's called a method of perfections. But the word perfection itself simply means progression, progressing from one point to another point. So what it does, this method, is it tracks the images of the zodiac, and it distributes the years of the domicile ruler of these successive images. And so we start from the lot of the daimon. Now you have to know, which is a very interesting and a bit of a weird thing with this method, is that it works best for a 360-day year, and not our solar year of 365 days and something added to that. So that is quite a weird thing to understand, because we are very much taught and drenched in a sort of a scientific way of understanding astrology. So the exact number of years, days in a year, sorry, as opposed to a what you call an ideal year of 360 days, is quite an interesting thing to notice, that it actually works in this system better to use the 360-day years and not the 365-day years.
That reminds me of the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, the mean conjunction from Abu Mashal. That's the same approach.
Right.
Okay.
That's, thank you. It's interesting indeed. Yeah. Okay. So now let's have a look at the method. It's quite simple when you start with it. So here you see the chart of Volker, And as you can see, he has a lot of the diamond in the image of the Virgin. So the scenario starts with that image. So the first 20 years because of Mercury, the minor years of Mercury are 20 years. So we calculate the 20 years from the day of birth and add the year of birth, and we add 20 years to it. And when you do that, you see a progression through images starting from the lot of the daimon. And I stopped at the fifth period, which runs up until the year 2030. But of course, this can go on further in the sixth period, which is also a very long one because it is also under the rule of Saturn, Kronos. So these are the first 5 periods of the Volker's life. So this is the scenario in a sense. So you can see that it is a very systematic approach of trying to delineate and try to find the scenario, which signs, which images are the several periods in his life, and they can be marked out by the changeover to the new signs. And I will go into that a little bit further. So this is the scenario for Volker. So let's have a look at the next one. You can see that there is software. You can see that the software is Planet Dance, and this program is very good and handy to use because it really, as you can see, it points out the periods, L1 and L2. That's simply the English words for level 1 and level 2. So we will be looking into the under periods, the level 2 periods of a major period. And the other words used are major periods. So what you see here, these 5 periods are called the major periods, but each period is of course quite long, and it can be subdivided into minor periods. And so the L stands for level, L1 is the major period, and L2 is the first sub period. And there are also level 3 and level 4 periods with even smaller amounts of time.
To give the reader an impression, that is all demonstrated in this book, where Martien is writing about this method in a book form, and he's using the data of the famous person Fassbinder, right?
Right, that's true, yeah.
Okay.
It was sort of a challenge to try to find in which period. I didn't know the person at that time, so it was sort of a test for me to try to find the period that was most, when he got most famous, in a sense. So his best period of life as to fame, etc.
Yes.
Okay. So you can see that the major L1 periods are quite long. Some are very long. So there are also sub-periods calculated like this. Now we take the same amount of number for each planet, but now we take them as months instead of years. So, and again, there is an ideal month used of 30 days and not the variance that we have today. So for this method, you use the 30-day, each month has 30 days, and there you stop the counting. And again, the software Planet Dance does this for you.
And if I remember that right, that goes back to Vetus Valens, right?
Right, yes, that's true. Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so here you see the subdivisions of the first period of 20 years. And you can see that the first period is always under the rule of the image and the planet of the first period itself. So the complete 20 years are under the rule of Mercury and the Virgin. Hermes is the name for Mercury, my last name. And so this first division, also the first 20 months of the year 1949 are also under the rule of the image of the Virgin and the planet Hermes Mercury. And so, and it goes on. So the next period after this Mercury Hermes period is that the one of Libra, the scales, I believe is the ancient name, with Venus, and Venus distributes the 8th month after that, after the Virgin Hermes period, and after Aphrodite's period, we see the Aries period of 15 months after the L2 period of Venus ends, etc. And this goes on until the full 20 years of the first period under the Virgin and Hermes Mercury are completed.
So basically, you are saying the long L1 period with these 20 years are colored by sub-periods where from 1951 the Libra energy comes into the picture, and later on the Scorpio and Sagittarius. So that's intriguing by itself, that you get a new color in the delineation process.
Yes, you do. And the differentiations between these periods is very important, because the relation each new planet has with the main ruler. So the indications of Mercury being the ruler of the first period has a certain relation with the second one under Venus, and the configuration between these two planets being Hermes Mercury and Aphrodite Venus is very important, because when there's no such a relation, so there is no configuration, as we can see here, there is an inversion between both of them. This might have an indication for what happens in that period. So it's always suggested that when an inversion is in play, there is some sort of breach in the period.
For people who are not familiar with the terminology, aversion is if there is no energy connection configuration, what modern people call aspects, right?
Yes, and there are two names for them. There are the semi-sextiles, so these are the neighboring signs. When you look at Mercury in this chart, you see it's in the goat-horned one, the Capricorn, and you can see that the neighboring signs are the bowman with the sun in it, your star sign, and the water pourer, where we find Jupiter and Venus, but Mercury is not connected to either of them, because he's in a neighboring sign, and that is the semi-sextile is called by sign, and that is called an aversion. And the other aversion signs are what now are called the inconjuncts, or the
I have a question there. If you look into the terms in the bounds, I believe the Venus and Jupiter are in the Mercury bound. Is that right?
I'm not quite sure.
Would that be relevant for using the Aphesis method to look into the bounds, whether there is a connection there?
Could be, yes. I must say I've never investigated that, but there is a concept called neighboring, and neighboring is whenever two planets are in the same bound. They don't have to be beside each other, like here Jupiter and Venus, but they have to be in the same bound.
So you might have to look into the Egyptian bounds, because in the Egyptian bounds, Aquarius has the first 7 degrees Mercury. So in this case, we have a connection between Mercury and Jupiter and Venus via the bounds.
Right.
But that doesn't belong to your everyday practice for using Aphesis, right?
No.
Not today. You might change that in the future. Okay.
Right. That's good, Volker, to say that like that, because it might come up in a later presentation. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. So what you also see here, when you look at the Taurus, the bull is the last period of the 1st of July of 1969. You can see that the last period is not the full 8 months of Venus, Aphrodite, because the period, the 20 years of the Virgin are up in that last period. So you see there's only 1 month, about 1 month, for Taurus Aphrodite to rule in the last period, the last L2 period of the complete Virgin Aphesis of 20 years. You can see that. So it just merely goes on until the full 20 years of the periods are done, and then it breaks off and a new major period starts. So that's very important to know, not the full months of a certain period. In the end of a long period, a major period, give the full measure of what each planet can distribute. So that's just so you know. That's nothing wrong with the program, it's just the way this method works. Okay, so let's have a look at the next one. Okay, now I said that another question is, what is this all about? So when you look at the left-hand side of, the right-hand side of this presentation, you see a very long list of all the periods in Volker's life, also subdivided in the L2 periods. And that's very important to notice the difference between them, because the alternation of the period rulers, the main period rulers, have much to do with the complete reason for this method, because the lot of the daimon, the lot of the spirit, has much to do with how we approach activities in our life, how we do things, how we carry out our actions. So the change of major period has a lot to do with what motivates the native in his life, but it also has to do with perhaps what we could call a new approach to things in life as per the new ruler of each major period. So when the Mercury period hands over to the Venus period, something might change in the life, because there is a certain, what you could say, a certain change of approaching action, a certain new way of approaching the manner in which you do the actions and in which you undertake things. So that's
well, you can say that. I finished high school then.
Okay. And then you started a new love life, I guess, because it's Aphrodite Venus now. I'm just kidding.
Yes, I had a girlfriend then in 1969. I had a girlfriend. Yeah, I met her in 1969. That's true.
Okay, so that can be quite a major change. But we will be going into all these changes and all the importance of all these things in this presentation piecemeal and later presentations, because it's a very interesting method of doing so. And
to give our viewers a taste of what we are doing, I did Archetypische Kosmologie with Peter Niehenke for 9 sessions for 22 hours. So let's see whether Martien is breaking that record. Okay.
Okay, well, we'll see. We'll keep this a bit shorter because this presentation, because well, it takes a lot of grit to get through all this new material. So we'll try to make it as easy for the listener as possible. So you can see that this alteration of major period rulers has to do with a certain new style, perhaps in the presentation and the manner in which a native does his actions or goes about his daily life. So and the interesting thing is that the configurations with each planet has a very important result for how things develop in the native's life, because this is sort of a scenario of how life presents itself to you and how you react to that. And this reaction has to do, the manner in which you take action is determined by the ruler of the major period. So we see here a Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn style of doing things. But the most important one is the first one. I'll get back to that in a minute. So what you see here is very interesting. We can do a very interesting take on what changes in the life because there is a new period, and I will show that in an upcoming slide. So each chronocator, or ruler of time, acts as the manager of the significations of the lot of the daimon for each period. And the signification is primarily action. So the new manager is assigned this portfolio during this new period, sort of in a relay race. The new planet gets the task of doing this for the native. And then it's also very interesting to know if it's a better planet or a planet that is less functional, etc. And that has a lot to do with the impact of these planets on the life's scenario. So how well is this manager able to perform his task compared to the previous one? So that's our first clue to interpreting this scenario. Now, as you can see, Planet Dance lists the natal factors that reside in each image, and these are also very important in the delineation of the successive periods, and I will show you this in an upcoming slide as well. Okay, so this is in essence what you do with making a scenario, and this is also what you can do with any chart. So I will invite you to get Planet Dance. It's free, it's very good software, and you can make these sort of scenarios for your own chart. So start doing that and you will see very interesting periods in life changing or becoming more different or more easy or more difficult during your lifetime. So, okay. Now, let's get back to some of the more important issues having to do with the domicile ruler of the first period, because that is also the domicile ruler of the daimon, of the spirit. So he rules the first period of life, but it's also the primary way the native does or goes about his or her business and his or her actions. So this planet actually describes how you do things. It is your usual and your habitual approach. And the reason for that is because this is the planet that is the ruler of the lot of the daimon, and the daimon has to do with how you approach life, how you react to things happening to you and how you take action on them. So in Volker's case, we have Hermes Mercury, which defines the actual way in which he normally, habitually, goes about his business. And this started from an early age on. So Mercury has to do with interest, curiosity, searching for stuff, debating, wrestling with it, rationalizing it, writing, etc. So you can read this at leisure. So you can see here that it's each planet as a ruler of the lot of the daimon has its own specific way of going about its business, doing things, taking action, doing things in life, reacting to stuff that happens to you, etc., etc. So
how important is the fact that Mercury is the ruler of astrology? Is that important as well?
Yes, because all the topics that are associated with each planet can be a very important thing that inspires the native. Of course, I know you have your sun, your Helios, the sun as well, in your rising image, which is, of course, the ruler of the ninth place. And of course, the ninth place has a lot to do with all the stuff that we also associate with modern astrology. But yes,
and the sun is in the terms of Mercury.
Exactly. So this Mercury is a very strong focus point for a lot of planets in your chart.
Yes.
And it confirmed by the fact that it's the ruler of the lot of the daimon, which has a lot to do with how you approach life and how you undertake stuff going on in your life.
If you have a chart like this, like mine, would you say you would be surprised if this chart owner gets not involved with astrology?
No, not necessarily, because there are a lot of other things that can be associated with Mercury. But in your case, of course, because of Helios, the sun in your first place being the ruler of the ninth, is of course a very interesting one. So yes, it would indicate or would suggest, so it might be astrology, but it might be all sorts of esoteric teachings. And I know from your biography that you sent very much for that this was a very strong point of interest for you. Now, what's also very interesting is this. So what motivates Volker primarily to take this mercurial action is shown by the configurations that Mercury has. And the interesting thing is, as we talked about the aversions already, you can see that there are actually only 3 planets that have very strong impact. Classical planets, of course, have a very strong impact on this Mercury, simply because they have a superior position to Mercury, which is they are in either the 10th or the 11th place. Is this? Yeah, that's the 11th place relative to Mercury, and that's called superior position. So you could say that in the zodiacal movement, these planets are in a sense, coming down upon Mercury. And of these planets, it is said that they have a major influence on the planet that they are configured with. So Mars, Moon, and Saturn have a very, very strong influence on this Mercury. So these are the main motivators in Volker's life. So
How is the definition for superior position?
Well, the definition in the book of Schmidt called Definitions and Foundations is decimation. And decimations means that it reduces the impact of the planet that is in this manner aspected, in the sense that these planets dominate it.
And how is it defined that these stellium planets are in the superior position? Is that what aspect is that?
The configuration is a trine.
Yes.
So the images are in a trine configuration. So Mercury will eventually come to Saturn and Mars, and the Moon will move out of the Virgin. But it's actually said that these planets will overpower the influence of Mercury, and in a more modern sense, I think that these motivations dominate why Mercury does what Mercury does.
But you are using an orb with this trine, right? You are not talking about whole sign houses aspects. You're talking about aspect with orb.
No, I'm talking with configurations. So in configuration wise, these planets are have a trine configuration with each other.
Okay, by the sign. You are talking about trine by sign, right?
Right, yes, I am.
Yes. Okay.
And of course, when Mercury progresses in its zodiacal image, it will eventually reach Saturn, and it will eventually reach Mars. But that's another question.
Okay.
But the configuration is like this.
Okay.
Okay. Now, also a very interesting thing, because this is a sort of a confirmation of the great importance of Mercury, is all the things that I read in Volker's biography having to do with the second place of the chart, because this is whole sign houses. I only work with whole sign houses for topics. So I see Mercury in the second place, and Volker's biography really emphasizes all the issues having to do with the second place. So he has a bank clerk apprenticeship. He was a loan officer, and then he started his law studies. Law has to do with Mercury, a saving fund, treasure branches, and then a training in rhetorical communication. That must be Mercury. He's also a writer, and he was also very important in therapeutic directions and natural remedies, which I associate with the second place. I can explain that later perhaps, but that has something to do not only with the sixth place perhaps, but also with the second place. And he's also has been a radio journalist, and now we meet Volker in his YouTube channels. Everything to do with Mercury and the second place, which is a very good illustration of the strength of this method. Sorry, because well, there are a lot of ideas about how you need to delineate somebody's profession, and but the interesting thing is that this has an important influence on this as well. So I just wanted to show that to underline the importance of the ruler of a lot of the daimon by means of its location in a place, which is here the second place. So that's nice. Okay. Now we come to a very important step in trying to get a grip on what this all means in a chart. So this is the preliminary evaluation of the scenario, and the way this was addressed was that it was called the support of the chart, the support for the native, which is actually the support in the natal chart. So let's have a look at this. So the first thing we need to check out has to do with the places. Through which places of the chart does this scenario progress over time. So you see the first one is, let me first say how this is a sort of stated. You can say that the most impact, the strongest punch comes whenever as an image, our planet is in a angular sign, a pivot, nowadays also called a stake, but it's pivots around which something revolves. So these planets are on these places are the strongest, so they have a very big punch. The succeeding places, which are the 2nd, 5th, 8th, and 11th place, are strong, but they are half as strong as the angular places, and the weakest places are the cadent ones, which you can see here. Now, when we look at this chart and see how this is divided over time in the scenario of Volker's chart, you can see that the 10th place is, of course, very strong because a lot of diamond is there and there are 3 planets there. The 11th place is also strong. It's less strong than an angular place, but you can see that the MC, the midheaven, the zenith of the chart, is also in the balance, in the 11th place. So that also makes it quite strong. So you can use the MC and the IC also as a factor having to do with force and strength, which is the actual use of of all the other cusp systems used in ancient astrology. They were used for trying to get a grip on the strength of planets and not the topics that had to do with the places, what we now call the houses. So
if you go in the tradition, the 12th house and the 6th house are the bad houses for the chart owner, and if those the bad diamond is, for example, in the 12th house, in the 12th place, and the illnesses are in the 6th place, so that would mean I got lucky, didn't I?
Yes, you did. Yeah.
Okay.
Now we will see how lucky you were, Volker, because
well, but in the tendency, it's good to have the bad diamond weak, right?
Right, that's true. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. But the point is, in your chart, it will come and play a major role in your life scenario, because in the 3rd period of your life, from 77 to 92, this period came to the fore because the progression of the scenario of zodiacal releasing came to the 12th place. So there must be something going on there having to do with 12th place issues.
Okay.
But whether they were bad or not has to do a lot with which planet is the ruler and how it's positioned. So there is a very famous remark referring to this, and in English it's saying all things being equal. So in general, you can say that the 12th place is a bad place, but all things being equal, when you study the chart in detail, you can also find things that alleviate the difficulties of the 12th place or the 6th place or any place that is not so strong or is perhaps even malefic in its nature. So all things being equal, this is in principle what it says, but we need to go on in a further determination and delineation and evaluation of what we see in the chart to be able to say what this specifically means for the life scenario. So that we will do in later presentations. But so yeah, that's what it is. Okay, so pretty good, right? There's only one perhaps downside to the 4th period because it's afflicted by a square configuration with Saturn, the Moon, and Mars. So, but okay, we need to take that into account later. Okay, now this is what's said about all these planets or all these places, which we now call houses, which is a very silly word, but I will not go into that. The actions of planets in pivotal angular images is that they are completely focused and concentrated on the life of the native and on the native himself. So you can say that the pivots are the most strong. They are conducive to action, progress, and accomplishment, and cadency often results in obstacles and setbacks. and I'm adding diversions, could mean a period of many changes and deviations from the life's purpose or the life's goal, if you can say that like that. So this is the first take on what it might mean for these periods and this scenario in its progression. Now let's look at
in that delineation you are doing. You are only using the place of the diamond as a starting point, as an angular point, as a first place.
yes,
and you are not interested recurring to the natal chart by itself, where the first place would be Sagittarius, right?
indeed,
That doesn't play into the delineation of the Aphesis.
not yet,
Okay.
because the further delineation, of course, has to do with where the ruler is placed and how we will is able to function or not.
Okay.
But this will come also in the presentations. You will see that. Okay, so the second major evaluation is how about the triplicity rulers of the sect light. Now, as you can see, most people know that, can see that Volker is born during the night or the early morning, and you see this by the sun being way below the degree of the rising, the rising degree, the horoscopos, the point marking out the degree of the rising image, which is at, I believe, 3. I can not see it quite well, but at the 3rd and the 4th degree, while the sun is at the 20th degree. So this is a night Earth. So we have to look at but the method is simple. You look at the sect light, which is in this case the moon, and we can see that the moon is in the Virgin. So this means that the triplicity rulers by night, because this is a night chart, the first one is the moon, the second one is Venus, and the third one is Mars. And this is, again, a very, very good indication in the chart of Volker. So we can add these things to the places when we evaluate the main periods. And you can see that there is a lot going on with these triplicity rulers. Now, the question is, what do we see with triplicity rulers? Let's first say that these are all placed very fortunately in Volker's chart, simply because the first one is the sect light itself. That's very good. It's in a pivot in the 10th, and the 10th place is paradigmatical of the issue of action, because in all ancient Hellenistic Greek literature, the 10th place is called the place of action. So, and we are dealing with the lot of the daimon, which has to do with action. So that's interesting. Now, the second one, that's Venus, is in a Cadent place. You can see it now, but it's in the 3rd place. That's not the best place for it, but it's with Jupiter, which helps a lot because it's the ruler of the ascendant, of the rising image. Jupiter is representing Volker, as it were, in his own chart. And the third one, that's Mars, is again with the sect light, the moon, in a pivot. So all of them are very favorably placed, perhaps with the exception of Venus, although there's something fortunate going on with Venus. And then we see that all these planets belong to the night sect, which is in lieu with, in the same line as this chart itself, because this is a night chart which favors the nocturnal planets, which are the moon, Mars, and Venus. So that's also very fortunate. Now, what are the triplicity rulers about? So they have to do with two important things in life. It's a general universal method. So it's about life in general. So it's not about specific things in life, but it's simply dividing the life in this manner in 2 periods, not in 3 periods as is often done, which was done in medieval period, but it divides the life in 2 periods, which is actually a way of saying what these methods are about. Simply the universal techniques, there are more of them. They are just simply about what can we say about this life in general terms. So when you take the life as a whole, how was the first part of life and how was the second part of life. And that's what you do with the triplicity rulers. Simply, and the third one needs to, we hope, support the other two. Okay, now the first period is very good. Why? Because the moon, it's in an angular place. So the first triplicity rulers, you can find this method explained in the works of Vege's Valence. When this is the case, the person is actually in a very good situation in the first period of life. His first half of life is very good. Of course, we must say, well, when you have Mars and Saturn there, what's the call, the beleaguering the moon, that's of course something else, but nonetheless, because it's in a powerful place, an angular place, the 10th place, this is actually one that is quite good. So in that case, we can say that Volker was quite fortunate in the first half of his life, with the exception perhaps of what Mars and Saturn did in this period. Now the second period is delineated by the second period, a triplicity ruler of the satellite, which is Venus, which is cadent, which might mean that the second part of life was perhaps more or less favorable or less successful, but it's not without its benefits because it's conjunct Jupiter. So the difficulty is always trying to decide, so when does this second period start? I don't have a clue, but it's also associated with the rising times of each image, but that's perhaps something for a later, for another presentation. So I will not go into that. And the third factor supports happily the other two, which is not the case for Venus, because Mars is in aversion to Venus. It cannot see Venus, so they have no relation, but it has a very strong relation with the first one. And Schmidt always said when the first triplicity ruler is in a good condition, then this will mostly last for the rest of the life. And especially when the third ruler of the triplicity supports the first one. So this is a very good scenario for success in the life of Volker. So that's the first thing the triplicity ruler does. And the second one has to do with eminence. And eminence has to do with the rank of the nativity. So an eminence doesn't mean that a person is a celebrity in one way or another, but it's influential in a lot of ways. So this person is probably a person who has some standing in society or has a very strong impact on what is going on in society. So when these planets are activated, it might indicate progress, promotion, rising in status, etc. But all things being equal, as I said before, and only is if this only goes when the support is good. And in this case, the support is very good. So when we look at Volker's biography, we see that he, he rose in society, if we can say it like that. And the last one was the appointed as ministerial counselor in 1993, which is very interesting because could you say, Volker, that this is the highest social ladder you achieved? Could
Yes,
you say
in society, that's the last point. Above me was the chief of my division, Referatsleiter, and above that was the Abteilungsleiter, and above that was the secretary, and then the minister. So I had only 4 chieftains above me.
Okay, so that's that supports the idea of what the triplicity rulers have to do with eminence. So that's very good. So.
But basically, you could say, if you are Ministerialrat, which is translating is very difficult. It's a title in German civil service. If you are Ministerialrat, you are in a category of less than 1% of the civil servants of Germany.
Right. Yeah. So this is really very interesting, and it worked for you, right?
Yes, it
so
did.
The triplicity rulers really paid off, to say it like that. So, well, our third use of the preliminary evaluation is checking out the fortune houses. And I'm not sure if people know about this, but in Greek Hellenistic astrology, the place where fortune was also counted as an ascendant, and it really marked off a new house division, like so. So you can see here which sign, which image where fortune is. That's the fortune ascendant, so that counts as the first place, and we can do the rest. So you can see that again, Volker's chart is very strongly supported by the evidence also from the fortune houses, simply because the fortune houses pack a lot of punch in the material world. So they have to do with promotion, with all sorts of making advancements in your life. And that's a very interesting thing to research, because whenever a person has a planet in the fortune MC, like Volker has here in the fourth period of his life in the bowman, the archer, where he has the sun, that's a very important place. So we conclude here that this fourth place is really, really very, very strong, simply because it's the natal ascendant. It is the 10th place, the MC from the lot of fortune. There is a light there, even though it's not the sect light. It's always good to have the sun in a certain place. The chronometer of this place, Jupiter, is cadent, but it's conjunct Venus, the second triplicity ruler. The sect light and the first triplicity ruler, the moon, are in superior position to this place. Again, so it is I think the most strong period of Volker's life. But it must have been eventful as well, because there's also an affliction, and some ancient texts speak of maltreatment. So this
that's true insofar as a lot of people in my ministry didn't like me that much and tried to stop me from stepping up on the career ladder, and so there was some conflict there.
Okay. So that's very interesting, because it's coming out of the 10th place, which has to do with people in the workplace, but also superiors. So that might also suggest some difficulty in that area.
Yeah, in one case, I was complaining about my Abteilungsleiter, that's the head of division, with a 35 pages complaint sent directly to the minister. And we had a lot of interesting experience to bury that under the carpet and then not fight it out. So that would be one of those in that period.
A very clear example for exactly this. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Okay. So when we evaluate this or conclude this is a very strong support in Volker's chart for eminence of attaining influential positions in life, and perhaps even political influence and policy making, which is the essence of what all these things might indicate.
Yeah, to give the viewers an impression, there are three main things happening in that period of the fourth period, that I was responsible for organizing a documentation for natural healing against the vehement contra position of the Ministry of Social Health, but me being in the Ministry of Economics, they couldn't stop me, and that was 4,000 pages, and they didn't like it at all. And then there is a second thing in that period. I also got into establishing a research institute in Lüneburg called Forschungsinstitut Freie Berufe. That's research institute for the liberal professions like lawyers and the doctors and all that. And that was quite influential in that time. That's true.
Okay. Again, thank you for this explanation, because it really underlines all of these factors using in delineating what these periods might mean. So, okay, let's look at another thing what's going on, because you can see that the major periods also change. So let's have a look at what possibly changes. And this is the strength of this method, in my opinion, simply because what you can see is a change in motivation or approach to life, simply because there's a new chronometer, a new planet ruling the major period for a long period of time. And the smallest one is are those of Aphrodite Venus, which is merely 8 years or 8 months in a sub-period. So there can also be new impulses simply because there are different configurations with this new ruler. So things change. What happens to the native changes, and his approach or her approach to life changes as well. So there's sort of a new method of doing things. So as I say here, natal planets can have different relations with the new ruler of the times. So some of them make their first appearance because they come from a semi-sextile or inconjunct, and now all of a sudden they have a configuration with the new ruler. So some planets come into the life for the first time, perhaps, as is shown by this principle. Now, some planets disappear. Why? Because they go from a natural configuration to an aversion, the semi-sextile or an inconjunct. So they play no role at all in what the chronometer of this new period does, or what motivates this new ruler of the time. So that's very important to take note of, because that disappears in life. And I said in my Dutch book on this method, how is it possible that some things that were so important in a certain period of your life, really very important at the forefront of your life experience, somehow simply disappear and leave no trace at all in your life? And this is the reason why this can be seen in this scenario, simply because that planet disappears from considerations having to do with the new chronometer. So that's a very interesting thing to notice. And some planets change their posture. So, and with posture, I mean their hostility, to put it a bit extreme, or their friendliness towards what's going on in the life. So when a planet changes, for example, from a trine to the previous chronometer of a period, and suddenly it becomes an opposition to the new chronometer of the new period, then you have certainly a challenge in dealing with this planet. It's the same planet as in the previous period, but its posture changes. Now you're in trouble with it, or you are fighting it, or it is fighting you, etc. So you can see very interesting things going on in your life. And
well, the interesting thing is this new chronometer is Venus, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
Venus rules the next 8 years, right?
Yes.
And that exactly is the time when I started my education as a bank kaufman, bank clerk, or education in banking, and then the whole legal studies in Tübingen till 76, and then the whole Referendarzeit, the second training for the bar examination. And I got the bar examination on the 20th of September in 1979.
Okay.
So basically, that's Venus, a little overlap. The real 8 years stop in 1977, right?
I cannot see because my slides are up.
Well,
So
if you're going from 1969, 8 years is 1977. And that would be the end of the student time. And then in January 1977, when in the year when the next planet comes along, I changed into Referendariat, which is a sort of bar examination training in the United States and in England. So that would mean Venus was responsible for the student time.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, that must have been a nice time, because Venus is also conjunct Jupiter, right?
I had a lot of relationship with nice girls. That's right.
Okay. So this is an interesting approach, and this is how you can try to get a view of the changes in the periods. And I was trained as an astrologer, and at a certain point I thought this might be the astrology of tracing what Jung meant with individuation, because individuation is coming to grips with things happening in your life and what it does internally with your personality. So I thought that was an interesting take on that, but I'm not quite sure if I can correlate Jung's individuation with this method, but I think it's a very important one, simply because the difficulty with Jung's ideas is that it's often a bit made loose from concrete experience. And I think that the concrete experiences of life really have to do with individuation. So,
well, in the traditional sense of university education in Germany, that is the idea of university training, to become your own individual, leaving home. I left home. I was living in Stuttgart, and I moved to Tübingen. I had my own room there for all the time. Sometimes I got back to do the washing with my mother, but basically I was put on myself. And at the end of this time, the individuation came sort of to a fulfilled individuation process, because after that I went into the legal profession and was my own person. I would agree on that.
Okay, interesting. So let's have a look. When we see the change of periods, we have to look at the relation between the new chronometer of the first period in relation to the chronometer of the second period. And when you see an easy transition, you can see this by these two planets having a trine or conjunction or a sextile with each other. There can be tension when you see the square aspect or the opposition, and we can see perhaps a breach in the periods when you see a semisextile or an inconjunct. So let's have a look at these periods, these changes in Volker's scenario. Well, the question is, this might be a breach. Why? Because Venus, the new ruler, the second ruler, the chronometer of the second period, is in inversion, a semisextile with Mercury, the chronometer of the first period. So we might expect perhaps a breach, but as Volker said, both Venus is in the bounds of Mercury, so perhaps it was not a severe one. The third period, we look at Mars. What's the relation of Mars with Venus, the chronometer of the period we are leaving? And that's also a breach. Why? Because Mars is in inversion and in conjunct with Venus. Again, a possible breach in the scenario. And then we go from Mars looking to the new period ruler, which is Jupiter. What is the relation between those two? Again, an inconjunct, again a breach. Interesting. And then we go to Saturn, the new ruler of the period. And again, we see an inconjunct between Saturn and Jupiter. So this suggests that there might be sort of a sharp difference perhaps between all these periods, simply because the rulers are in aversion to each other. Now, this need not be very difficult or perhaps dramatic in the life, because the support of this native, of this chart, is very good, as we've shown with the triplicity rulers and the fortune houses. But it could also mean a change in direction, a change in career perhaps, or perhaps a change in functionality as a person who is working in a certain place. That might mean that as well. So when we look further, so again, in general, all things being equal, the breaches are possible major changes in direction, a period closed, or perhaps a new approach. But we see also something else. You can see that the fourth period, which is Jupiter, actually might refer back to something that started in the 8 years under the rule of, in the second period, under Libra and Aphrodite, simply because these two are conjunct. So you could say that perhaps the 12 years of the Jupiter and the Bowman period refer back to the 8 years of the Libra Aphrodite period. And
well, you could say from 1993, I had my final position in the ministry till the end of 2004, when I retired early, because it was possible to retire early and change to university studies. And you could say the second period was the education period, where the fruits of that education got harvested at the beginning of 1993, a little bit later than when the period started. So there is a connection there.
And it's, something like that might also be the case for the last period, because when you look at Saturn, which started in 2004, interesting that you retired from work in that period, because that's
on the 31st of December, I could leave the ministry and got my pension, and I started my doctoral program, which lasted till 2011. And after that, the radio journalism, and after that, the orthomolecular medicine activities and the astrological activities with my YouTube channels.
Yeah. Now, what I was trying to refer to is that the ruler of the fifth period, the chronometer of that is Chronos Saturn, which is conjunct Mars, and Mars is the ruler of the third period. So there might also be a connection between what happens in this fifth period might be strongly related to what happened or what developed in the third period.
That is true in one respect. In 1989 and 1990, I was heavily engaged in the political scandal against homeopathic activities of the bad government, and the documentation of the natural methods was published. And that recurred when I founded orthomolecular citizen groups in my place where I was living then. So the natural path, the natural healing things returned to my life in 2011, 2008.
Okay, that's great. So interesting. So this is also a thing people should take into account when trying to understand, okay, what's happening in the changeover of all these periods. And perhaps you can see a sort of a recurrence, one period trying to connect again with something that happened before in the life. So that's interesting to try to do. So let's have a look at another thing. So when periods change, new planets become the chronocrates, and you can see that a malefic hands over to a benefic in the changeover of major periods. So these are the general, perhaps, changes that happen in these periods. So things might become easier, a less difficult or less laborious period. There might be some sort of relief in connection with the previous period, a liberation of sorts, and the sharp edges are smoothed. When it's the other way around, when a benefic hands over to malefic, then it might be, again, all things being equal, that things might get harder or tougher, perhaps sharper edges to the life or what's going on or happening in the native's life. Things might be more on edge, perhaps it could become more laborious, less easy. It might be a heavy period, full of doubt, changes, and transitions. So these are general, again, all things being equal, general significations of what might happen in the changeovers of the major periods. So, okay, so let's have a look at Volker's chart and his periods. Now, you can see that the changeover from Mercury to Venus, from Hermes to Aphrodite, is still benefic of the sects, which is in general a good thing. So that's a nice period of the life. The second one is changing to malefic of the sect, and we know from experience also and from the text that a malefic belonging to the sect is less troublesome than one that is not belonging to the sect, which is in this case Saturn, because this is a night chart, and in the night charts the Moon, Venus, and Mars are the better planets, to say it like that, and the day planets Jupiter, the Sun, and Saturn are less functional, I'm not sure how to put this, less functional is not a good word, but we need to go into the sect perhaps in another presentation, because that's a very loaded concept in the ancient literature. Okay, the changeover to the fourth period is also perhaps a nice one. It's still benefic. Jupiter is always in what way, in any way, benefic, although he does not belong to the sect in this case. So this might also be of influence. And then we have the last one changing to malefic, not of the sect. So these might indicate the changeovers, the sphere, how how would you call it, the energy of the time. You can use all sorts of words for this, but this is something you can take into account when you try to get a grip on what happens when these periods change over.
Would you say this is the period where I was doing my doctoral studies, astrology and law, and I finished that after 12 semesters, which is 6 years in Germany, and I put in my paper, and I published my paper beforehand, which my professors didn't really like, but I didn't pass the final exams. So my doctoral thesis did not get accredited by the university, so I don't have a PhD, but I published my thesis anyway. Would you say that goes along with that malefic?
Yes, I think so, yes. In what period was this? Sorry?
Well, I started my studies at University of Hanover, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz Universität, in the 1st of January of 2005. And I did all the studies in religious science and philosophy of science and in legal aspects and in social theory. And I finished the studies in the spring of 2011, and I produced my thesis and got it printed, which the professors didn't like, because normally you have to wait till you finish the exam and then you are allowed to print it. And anyways, it was a theme. The thesis was astrology consultation, astrology delineation, and the law. And it was bought by the highest court, Bundesgerichtshof in Karlsruhe. But the peers, the mentors who have to evaluate the thesis, whether it's good enough for university standards, said, no, it's not good enough. It's non-Rite, we call that in Germany. So I didn't get the PhD, but I got my book bought by the legal profession. And this sounds like Saturn, malefic in that period.
Indeed, but it also perhaps has something to do with the moon, Saturn being with the moon, the sect-light, which is the planet which has to do with the status that has to do with that. So yeah, it sounds like an affliction of Saturn, and your haste publishing it.
But the interesting thing is, the interesting thing about this is, if I would have passed the PhD, I would have gone on to a second PhD in philosophy, the philosophy of astrology, the belief, all the aspects of the grounding of the craft. And because I failed, I couldn't do that second PhD, and I changed to journalism and became a radio journalist.
Okay. So that was a major change of direction in a sense.
Yes.
Okay.
In 2011.
2011. Right. Okay. So let's have a look at what happens during each major period, because we just now did a full treatment of how you can evaluate the changeover from major period to major period. And now we're going to have a look at what you can do with the minor periods, the mechanics of this method. So as you can see here, this is the first period of Volker's life, under the rule of Hermes Mercury and the Virgin. And what you can see is that there are planets in this major period, 3 of them, the Moon, Mars, and Saturn. And when you look at these tables in the software Planet Dance, you can see that there is a symbol which marks the other images belonging to these 3 planets in the first period of the Virgin. So you can see Scorpio highlighted with this symbol, Capricorn, the water pourer, Aries, etc., and the crab for the moon, etc. So this is what you can see here. If there is a planet in this image, then this planet plays a very important special role throughout the main period. And as stated above, this planet will point out important motives or impulses that urge the native to action during this whole period. And the domiciles, when these are activated, they signify something. So you could say that it is as if the planets that are in this sign get an extra punch. So, for instance, the Scorpio period, which started at the 1st of April in 1952, is as if the planet Mars gets more prominence during this period because he's in the image of the major period. So it's sort of as if it's highlighted somehow. So
Well, that would be when we moved from Celle, my place of birth, to
yeah.
Stuttgart.
Okay. Well, that's interesting because Mars always has to do with breaches. Something changes. You make a new
Dramatically,
start.
my father had a company in Celle which got bankrupt, and he had to change his life and took the whole family to Stuttgart to start a new life.
Okay. Interesting. Because this is typically something that Mars does. We can indeed check out what might be the things that push the native to act in a certain way. Now, because you're very young at this in this period of time, so this is often something that happens to the native unless something done by the native, which is.
And I have a picture of myself of those days where I was riding a cow.
Okay.
Is that Mars, cow riding?
Now, it sounds a bit like it. Yeah.
Okay.
That's interesting. Yeah. Okay, so now this is important. I call this a period typical motivation or event, simply because when you compare these scenarios of one native with another, not every native has a planet in the period that is distributed by this Aphesis method. So it's also typical for this specific horoscope. No one has a chart like this, and this is very important in the first period of life for Volker. So that's the first thing to take into account. And there's also, you can see this, it also refers to the planets that are in the image that we are now investigating. Now, the second thing that is very important is that in this long period of 20 years, which is quite long, these L2 periods, they move through the zodiac and the places that these images of the zodiac occupy. So some periods have to move through the angles, some through the succeeding places, and some through the cadent places. And of these, the pivots are the most important ones. So that's sort of I don't know the English word for relief, but it highlights certain points, certain years in these long periods of time. So the angular periods are also marked, in this case with this symbol. So you can see which image in this long period of 20 years is actually an angular image. And when these angular images become more important in these periods of time, in this major period, then you could say that there might be something going on in the life, strongly affecting the native, or having to do with a career move of sorts. So these are the pivot points. The angular images are the pivot points of a chart. And well, these are the things where things get really activated for the native or by the native himself. So that's very interesting. And the angular places and the succeeding places were also called the places conducive to business. So when planets are there, they are at business, they are doing things. So that's the second most important thing shown in these charts. So this is what Schmidt said about it. The angles and the succeedings are more conducive to progress and accomplishment, and cadency often results in obstacles and setbacks. All strongly, again, all things being equal, strongly dependent on how the planets are located, of course. So, and these things go for the major periods as well as for the minor periods. When a major period is an angle, it's a very strong period in life. So, okay. Now, with this, I come to the end of my presentation. And
okay, thank you very much. And now you have to give me back the host position.
I will do. I will just mention what we'll do in the next one, because in these minor periods, you can see the certain focus points in the life. For instance, the finding of one's life's work, which is a very interesting one. And we'll hope to see everybody in the next presentation, part 2 of this fascinating method. Thank you.
And a question to you, Martin. When you have clients, how many sessions do you usually have for a client if you use this method? Do you have as much space as you have with me? Because in my case, you are demonstrating your method and we're talking about theory and practice. So with a client, you wouldn't talk about all these details in terminology. You would just delineate as a normal consultant. But how many sessions would you need to do what you do with me in demonstrating this method?
Well, as you are an astrologer, I would take more sessions, but normally I do one session with a client and focus on the period in which the person is in right now.
Oh, okay. So you're basically finding out what does the client want to know, and then you focus on that question and leave the rest aside.
Right. They mostly come with a certain issue they want to investigate, and then I check these Aphesis periods to see what's going on and what has developed in the year before or some years before, and which is and what is upcoming. So,
and you offer this service in English, in Dutch, and in German, I believe.
In German as well, yes.
So three languages are available all over the world, and the telephone number is here. So give me back my host position, please.
I will stop the share, and I will make you the host. Yep.
Yeah, I'm now the host again. So, Martin, thanks for this first part of a couple of sessions, I suppose. It looks like we will be getting close to the record with Peter Nienke, probably. Anyways, this was very, very nice, and I really liked it because that's what I had in mind in talking with you about. We need more YouTube videos where the traditional approach in a traditional astrology is demonstrated, so people can see how a traditional astrologer is working every day in the trenches. And I really like that. Thank you very much. We talk later when we stop the recording. For the viewers, thanks for stopping by, and till the webinar number 2 with Martin Hermes. And I stop the recording.